Friction. Friction is really important in Mechanics 1. It's really important that you take friction into account when you're looking at questions involving rough surfaces. When you're looking at questions involving a smooth surface, you do not have to consider friction. But it is vital that you read the question to make sure whether it says it's a rough surface or a smooth surface. The best example of this is if you put your hand on a table and you push it away from yourself, the friction is acting towards you. Friction is a force which opposes motion between two rough surfaces. It occurs when the two surfaces are moving relative to one another, or when there is a tendency for them to move relative to one another. As the applied force increases, the force of friction increases to prevent the block from moving. If the magnitude of the applied force exceeds a certain maximum or limiting value, the block will move. While the block moves, the force of friction will remain constant at its maximum value. So friction can get bigger depending on how much force is being applied, but there'll be a maximum value that friction can be, and once the force applied exceeds that, the block will move. The state where the friction maximum is equal to the force being applied is referred to as limiting equilibrium. It's on the point of moving. The limiting value of friction depends on two things: the normal reaction, R, between the two surfaces in contact, and the roughness of the two surfaces in contact. So on this diagram, the R is perpendicular to the plane or the surface, the table, whatever it is, and we're moving in this direction, so the friction, as you can see highlighted here, is in that direction. You can measure roughness using the coefficient of friction, which is represented by the letter mu. The rougher the two surfaces are, the larger the value of mu. The smoother the surfaces, for smooth surfaces, there is no friction and the mu is 0. So remember, you must read the question. If it says smooth surface, you can ignore the force of friction. Now, to calculate how big the friction is, and to calculate the friction maximum, we use this equation. The maximum or limiting value of the friction max between two surfaces is given by friction max is equal to mu times the normal reaction, where mu is the coefficient of friction and R is the normal reaction between the two surfaces. So, let's have a look at an example using friction. A block of mass 5 kilograms lies at rest on a rough horizontal ground. The coefficient of friction between the block and the ground is 0.4. A horizontal force P is applied to the block. Find the magnitude of the friction force acting on the block and the acceleration of the block when the magnitude of P is A, 10 newtons, B, 19.6 newtons, and C, 30 newtons. So, to do this, let's draw a diagram and highlight firstly the key points in the question. So we know the block is 5 kilograms and we know the coefficient of friction is 0.4. And we also know it is a rough horizontal ground, so we've got to include friction. So A is equal to 2.1 meters per second to the minus 2. So this is a question to do with friction. Remember, you must check in the question whether it's a rough or a smooth surface. If it says rough, then you must include friction. And remember, friction max is found by doing mu times by the normal reaction.